Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American. Devoted to the business of purveying food and decanting wines, Food and Wine Radio is a unique program highlighting not food recipes or wine vintages, but how to make a profit while satisfying America's palates. In this competitive but highly rewarding sector, many men and women have made profits while fulfilling a dream. Food and Wine Insider is all about better managing any business involving food and wine. Each week, your co-hosts sit down with successful restaurateurs, food mavens, winery vintners, store owners, food suppliers, and other leaders in the worldwide industry that centers on foodstuff and wine. In frank give-and-take sessions, guests and panelists talk about the business of bringing healthy and pleasurable foods and wines to others. Your Food and Wine Radio host are Ann Daw, former president of the Specialty Food Association and a longtime food executive who has held senior positions both here and abroad with Kraft Foods and Philip Morris. Don Mazzella, a nationally known business commentator. On each show, they invite leaders of the world's culinary and wine industries to share the secrets of their success. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.
Our next guest is Marc Silverberg, who is the proprietor of Marc's Cheesecake Shop in Glen Rock, New Jersey. We asked him here to talk about his contest for customers, which I saw and found fascinating, and how he operates or has been called one of the most successful shops in the state. Marc, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your shop, and then I'll turn it over to Ann, who has a host of questions.
Okay, great. Well, the shop is called Marc's Cheesecake, and that's what our first big item was and our claim to fame. We create over 30 flavors of excellent cheesecake. It's a unique kind of a cake because usually cheesecakes are either very heavy and a little bit dry, kind of stick to the roof of your mouth-ish, or they're light and fluffy. And ours are creamy in consistency and texture, but they're heavy. When you pick up a box, the customers, they realize the heft of the cake. So it's kind of a hybrid, and it's very unique. We also make our own ice creams. And as of a couple of months ago, we began making raw edible cookie dough. Now with the ice cream, we have the standard flavors, the vanillas, the chocolates, the cookies and cream, the cookie dough, but we also do unique stuff like burnt brown sugar and honey rosemary, and we even have a picante ice cream, a spicy ice cream, which we call hot blonde, which has some chipotle pepper in a caramel ice cream with chunks of blondies. And that's what we do. I started out with a shop in the center of Jerusalem back in the late 80s, and after 4 years, sold that shop and traveled around the world for 2 years. Came back and opened up about 23 years ago in New Jersey.
And it's all yours.
And
thanks, Don. Hi, Marc, and welcome to Food and Wine Insider. I think you've already answered quite a few of my questions, but
I'm sorry.
No, I love that. Are you kidding? It's great because I hear the enthusiasm you have for your business, and you love talking about it. So we're going to talk some more.
Great.
I would love to hear a little bit more about your story, because as you said, you started in New Jersey. I guess you were born and raised there. You went to Jerusalem, and then you came back to Glen Rock, New Jersey. Just tell us about that adventure.
Well, there were a few stops in the middle. I was born, and in my early life, I lived in Teaneck. And then we moved up to close by in New York to Rockland County. My story, I don't know. I never intended to go into the food industry. It wasn't my plan at first. I studied education at the University of Wisconsin and worked in informal education, running after-school programs, community centers, a volunteer program, and more that kind of stuff. I've also taught English as a second language in 2 countries. But while I was running a volunteer program in a small town in Israel on the Mediterranean, I developed this cheesecake recipe and eventually opened up a shop in the center of Jerusalem actually, if you're familiar with the history of Jerusalem, it was historically a walled city. And then about 120 years ago, it got too crowded in what is now called the Old City, and they built started building outside, and my shop was actually on the first street built outside the walls of the old city. It was quite exciting. I was fortunate to be near the government press office, so a lot of famous people came in, from Thomas Friedman to Natan Sharansky, the governor of Illinois. One of the most fun times was when the whole battery of U.S. soldiers that manned the Patriot missiles that protected Israel during the Gulf War came in. I did that for several years, and then I sold the business, traveled around the world for a couple of years, and came back to New Jersey. And about 23 years ago, opened up my shop originally in Clifton, and then 5 years ago we moved to Glen Rock.
You know, I think you're very humble because if I read your story correctly, you did start in education and you went to work with refugees in Israel. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I was helping to run. What happened was I went to volunteer on this program, and soon after I'd arrived, the size and scope of the program doubled, and they needed more staff, so they actually hired me on to coordinate one portion of this program. And fortunately for me, and this is to me the most important stuff I've ever done in my life, and the stuff I'm most proud of, much more so, to be honest, than cheesecakes, I happen to have been in this town of Ashkelon at the time that there were over 28,000 new immigrants from Ethiopia came in. These were people who had lived, as most of the world lived, 200 and 300 years ago, and our volunteers were integral in helping them integrate into a modern society. Basically, the government took care of all the real necessities like housing and food, and they had education set up for the parents to learn to speak Hebrew, but no one could find funding to take care of the children, and so that's what our volunteers did. And as I look back on my life, if there's anything I've been involved in that's somewhat historic, that was it.
Well, I think that's really wonderful. I really appreciate your sharing that story. So you traveled all over the world, but you came back to New Jersey. So why New Jersey?
Well, my family's here. My sister and her family live in Short Hills. My mom at the time was in West Orange. Now she's up in Pompton Plains. So it made sense that this would be the place I would come to.
Wonderful. You talked about your cheesecake flavors and your ice cream flavors. Could you describe some of the flavors that you love so much in terms of ice cream?
Well, you know, it's interesting.
What's your favorite?
The ones I love aren't necessarily the ones that the customers love. But that's okay. That's part of doing something that's a little bit outside the box. So, for example, one of the first batches of ice cream that we made was, because I don't know if you're familiar with Glen Rock, but I always joke that Glen Rock is ruled by people that are under 4 foot tall because it's all about the kids there. So right. I thought I'd make a peanut butter and jelly ice cream, and I thought the kids would go crazy for it. No, it was all the adults that liked it, not the kids. The kids in that town have grown up, and in our town have grown up watching Bobby Flay and Morimoto, and they come in with these very developed palates for 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds. In fact, I'll never forget the day one young man tasted our burnt brown sugar, and he looked at me and was very affirmative, enjoyed it, said he liked it, but then he kind of looked at me quizzically and said, "It's wonderful, Mark, but don't you think it needs a textural element?" So these are the kind of gourmand children that we have. I made a cardamom flavored coffee, which I called Turkish coffee, that I thought was terrific, and it just didn't sell. So what I like isn't really what matters. It's more what the customers like. I just enjoy doing new and unique stuff and seeing. And
I think that's fantastic. And seems like you have on the ground market research going on, because these kids basically tell you what they like, because they're pretty good at that as well. And you talked about cookie dough. Most moms, and certainly my mom, and I sort of wrinkle my eyebrows a little bit as well, usually tell the kids, don't eat the cookie dough when I'm making cookies or whatever. But your treat is edible. Talk about what makes your cookie dough different and obviously delicious, and obviously doesn't give anybody a bellyache. So tell us a little bit about the ingredients to that.
Sure. Well, the reason why your mom smacked your hand when you reached for the batters when she was making cookies is because there are raw eggs in it.
Sure.
And our cookie dough is made without any eggs at all. the other health issue that can be involved with cookie dough, with raw cookie dough, is the flour, because the health department, the health rules dealing with flour aren't very stringent in terms of bacteria, because the expectation is that it would be cooked. So we heat treat our flour. We heat it up to 160 degrees to kill any bacteria that might be in it. And then, of course, we let it cool before we make our cookie dough.
Fantastic. Don mentioned earlier that you just ended a contest to find the next great flavor of ice cream. Anything you want to share on that?
Sure. Well, we do that all the time. For quite a while, we had a box up in the store where people put in suggestions, and whichever suggestion I make, and by the way, two of my favorite flavors, the burnt brown sugar and the honey rosemary, were both customer suggestions. And whoever puts in a suggestion that we actually make, of course, gets a pint of that ice cream. So the winner from the Instagram contest was a lemon poppy, which I'm going to wait a little bit on making because it's kind of more of a spring and summer flavor with the lemon. But I just thought the idea of mixing in the poppy seed was really nice. And I've, of course, had lemon poppy muffins and enjoyed them. We do have in the past, we've made a lemon basil, which was very popular. So this will be a variation.
You know, you talked about, that's fantastic. In fact, it sounds really wonderful. So I love lemon poppy. So
There you go.
I can't
well,
wait
you'll
for
have
you
to come by.
I will have to come by. You talked about Instagram, and I've seen your posts on Facebook. Tell me about how you use social media to help get the word out about your business.
Well, this is an area that's relatively new for me. You know, I'm 58, which means I didn't grow up, attached to a cell phone and texting all day. Although I do have a little bit of tech savvy. I was speaking with a friend who's worked in the field of marketing and discussing how to better market my business. And she said these magic words: in terms of marketing food, I only want to tell you 3 words: Instagram, Instagram, Instagram. And it's true. One of the things I'm just discovering is among young people today, there is this zeal for food, for gourmet food, for unusual food, and in particular for photography of what might be called extreme food. And I think it's great. I think it's great that people are interested in new and unique things and branching out a little bit. I've been fortunate. I've lived on 2 other continents and traveled the world and got to experience a lot of stuff that sometimes in a country that's surrounded by big oceans, we don't really interact with. And I think through food, that's a great way to start learning about other cultures.
No, I think that's terrific. I have a teenager, and she's always taking pictures of whatever it is she's eating. And I am never quite sure where she's sending that all, but it's clearly through Instagram.
And she'll be an influencer someday.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that's what's happening in your shop. Ice cream and the current frigid cold that we have don't necessarily pair up. And I think I read somewhere that you introduced or you've tried to do some soups. You want to talk a little bit about that?
All right. Well, we actually have made soups for a while. And to be honest, they never took off really strong. Although, in my opinion, and those of some others, they make excellent soups. So for a while, we had 2 soups every day in the store. And when we added in the cookie dough, if you ever come to visit, you'll see we have a very small storefront. So there's only so much space to do many different things. So we decided to stop with the daily soups. And then we did make some matzo ball soups, chicken matzo ball soup, for the Jewish holidays in the fall. And we just sold it. We didn't have it hot in the store. We just sold it by the quart. And that was very successful. We sold over 170 quarts between the 2 holidays, which was very nice. And so I decided to start sort of a food club where I've been collecting email addresses, and we're starting to send out notifications each Sunday. And the idea is that people will have till Tuesday to order, and then we'll make the soup on Thursday, and it'll be available for pickup by the quart on Friday and Saturday.
Wow, that's a really great idea. Have you ever thought about having additional stores or franchising or?
I don't know about franchising, but I certainly have thought about having additional stores. We've got to get this one revving up better first.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, my idea is that eventually, I would hopefully at some point open a second store and supply it from the current one, and then if we ever got to the point of a third store, take the baking out to a more centralized area, and to go from there.
Sort of like a commissary kind of concept.
Yeah, because rents in towns like Glen Rock are not inexpensive, and if we can use more of the area for customers as opposed for production, that would be helpful.
Right. Wonderful. Now, to source your ingredients today.
How do I
Is
source
it local?
them?
Is it, where do you source them from? The basis for your ice cream.
My dairy comes from a dairy distributor that I've worked with since I started back in 1994. Actually, I was put in contact with them by the women who owned the bakery that I bought, the facility that I bought. Chocolate we get from a variety, and that type of stuff we get from a variety of suppliers. We use, most of our chocolate is imported from Belgium and is of highest quality. Hard not to snack on while we're baking. Depends on the ingredients. Fortunately, there are great access to the internet to different spices and herbs that maybe 20 years ago when I started, I would have had a lot of difficulty finding. And I also use the local suppliers, like Restaurant Depot and Costco now has a store that's more oriented towards business. So we get our ingredients from a variety of places. We try to remain local in terms of produce. We can't, we're not able to get flour and such that's produced locally because Jersey's not a great producer of wheat. But as much as possible, we try to source local produce, and we go from there.
So I think there's so much of you in this business, so it's like the shop is a reflection of you, Marc. Is there anyone that works with you on coming up with new ideas, or is your not a true consultant per se, but someone who you sort of always your go-to person for helping you with your business?
Well, I'm very, very fortunate. We're just a staff of 3, including myself, and the other 2 staff members are amazing. They're amazingly committed to the business. They're great people to hang out with. Although they don't own the business, they act and perform their duties as if they're partners in the business, and I'm very fortunate. One of them is an immigrant, and so she's originally from Mexico, and she's able to add a little bit. And I've traveled a lot in Latin America, and I speak Spanish fluently, so we're able to play back and forth with different flavors from there, and we do a dulce de leche cheesecake. That was her idea. Mm-hmm. The other staff member is this amazing guy who is retired from a career as an executive and was looking for something to do part-time to pass his time, and he's fell into something that was a little more involved than I think he was looking for at first.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what's next for Marc's Cheesecake and for you?
Well, we're working this time of year. January, February is our slower time of year, as in most businesses, and this is the time that we experiment. So I'm playing around with a bunch of different stuff that we're hoping to introduce over the next couple of months. I'll give one hint. I was able to find a machine that, can you imagine something the shape of a pancake or a waffle, actually, in the shape of a corn dog, and it produces them to make waffles on a stick. What we're going to do is, instead of filling the waffle batter that replaces the corn batter in a corn dog with a hot dog, we're going to fill it with cookie dough. So
wow.
You'll cut into this corn dog shaped waffle, and out will come edible cookie dough.
Oh my goodness. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Any other places that you distribute to? Is it all retail for you in terms of your front, or have you thought about sort of producing products to send out to I don't know, places where kids are, and maybe even things where they could be delighted, whether it's in, a hospital or a carnival or, on the boardwalk, those kinds of things. Just curious if your distribution is really your store, or have you thought about, you make a really fantastic product, getting more people to be able to have the opportunity to have it.
Right. We do some wholesale sales to restaurants. I'd rather not mention them because a lot of them present the product as their own, and I don't want to blow their gig.
No worries.
We do sell to some restaurants. There you go. We do some. I do actually personally have a background in vending. I worked for a guy who sold falafel when I was a student out in Madison, Wisconsin. And that's always been an interest of mine. We did dip our toes into it a little bit with a few weeks at what was then the brand new Glen Rock Farmers Market. We haven't done a lot of off-premises stuff, but it is something that's kind of in the back of my mind that I would like to do someday.
Fantastic. That would be really awesome. We talked about your early career and your having started in education and having worked with refugees. Are there any non-for-profits or social things that you support that are really you're passionate about, that are somehow either related or not related to your business in terms of areas that you feel are really important that you support?
Well, we do a lot of charitable work out of the store. We donate cakes to a lot of different organizations. The one that's the most important to me that we've worked with through the years is the Children's Hospital at St. Joe's in Patterson. Our original location was in Clifton, just over the Patterson-Clifton border, and we were not so very far from the hospital. And we've participated. They have a food tasting every year, and we've participated for the past 10 years. And we've done some other work. We've done a little bit of work with Eva's Village in Patterson also, which is this phenomenal place where it started out as a soup kitchen, and now it's added a shelter for battered women and a halfway house for people coming out of incarceration. They do, and also they work with people trying to get over drug addiction. So they do phenomenal work, and we've done a little bit of work with them. Personally, my charitable issue that I do separate from the business is when I sold my restaurant in Jerusalem, I traveled around the world for a couple of years before coming back, and I spent a little bit of time volunteering in a refugee camp in Dharamsala with Tibetan refugees. And so whatever personal charity I do goes there.
Mark, tell us your website and your location so people know.
Okay. The location is at 251 Rock Road in Glen Rock. For people that know the area, it's across the street from what they call the Pink Bank. Apparently the Bank of America there changed hands many times, so the folks in town just started calling it the Pink Bank because they were, for a little while, not sure which bank was there. Our website is simply markscheesecake.com. Also, I would recommend we probably do more on our Facebook page as a place for information, and that's just to search for Marc's Cheesecake.
Okay, and you don't send out care packages to people, do you?
For the most part, no. We have gotten calls from people from different parts of the country that had family nearby that asked us to bring a cake over, and of course when we're able to, we accommodate. But regretfully, our cakes don't freeze well, and in order to ship them, cakes have to be frozen, not for freshness, but for, I guess you'd say, structural integrity. So we're not able to do mail order with our cheesecakes, but as I was saying earlier, this is the time of year that we work on new projects because business is a little slower. And one of the projects for the next 6 weeks is working out a way to ship out our cookie dough. And hopefully that's something we'll be able to announce in the spring.
Well, I tell you, Mark, listening to you and Ann, I live in Palisades Park, New Jersey, and you made my mouth water to go out and drive up there to your place. But I guess my questions were going to be, but you answered it. You only have 2 employees to do all of your work. Did I hear that right?
Well, there's three of us altogether, yes.
Well, three. That is amazing. And it's amazing that you've worked on it. Beyond that, Ann, I think, answered most of the asked most of the questions that I would have asked, except to say you sound as if you've really thought out everything. Don't you think so, Ann?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show, Mark, and hear your story. I've seen pictures of you on the website and on Facebook, and I'm still perplexed as to how you keep so slim running the store that you do. So I don't know if you have any secrets about that.
Well, there is a bit of a backstory to that. I'm relatively slim now, but that's not the story of my life. Actually, I'm a very fortunate beneficiary of modern science. I had been morbidly obese the vast majority of my life. I kind of say I was a chubby little kid and a fat high school student, and by the time I finished college, I was obese. And just a little less than a year and a half ago, I had bariatric surgery, and I was able to lose close to 240 pounds.
Oh my goodness gracious! Wow.
So,
wow, bravo for you.
If you look back further on my website, you'll see the other incarnation of Mark.
Wow, fantastic. Good for you.
Yeah, but it is an important issue, though, and certainly having suffered from obesity my whole life, it is something I consider in terms of having a store that sells stuff that's not the best for keeping your waist thin. And the answer to that is listen, we're human beings. I don't think there are many people who can always eat healthfully. I think that we need to have balance in our lives and to eat, for the most part, in a healthful manner, but also to enjoy our food. And there are foods that are very enjoyable that aren't necessarily healthy, but we have to, again, balance is the key. Not eat them too often and not eat them in huge portions. And that's kind of what I do now.
And I think that's a great philosophy to end with, that you do sell an indulgent food, and it's something that there's great joy in having it, but having it in moderation makes the most sense, so that you can enjoy it and not feel tremendously guilty at the end of the day, or affect yourself.
You talk about enjoying the food. I get great enjoyment these days from watching people eat my stuff and the way they enjoy it. I don't need to eat it all the time. I know what it tastes like. But it is, sometimes I've said I have the best job in the world. I get to make kids smile. It's almost like being a clown at a circus in some ways. And I'm going to hold you to that issue that you wanted to come and visit the shop.
Thank you so much, Mark, and I really appreciate you being on the show. And I do get to New Jersey, and I will find a way to see you at your shop. So thank you so much.
We have a whole big box of little taster spoons, so you'll be able to taste everything.
Excellent.
Take care now. Thank you.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? Go to 2hsa.com and get a free employer's primer. Health savings accounts are a cost-effective way of offering health care benefits to your employees and yourself. HSAs build retirement funds for your employees, improve morale, and reduce your health care benefit cost. For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com.
Dan Perkins here from Recalculating.biz with your featured book. I want to tell you about a recent interview I had with Bob Bethel, a turnaround specialist with lots of success in small business. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. He tells us of his life successes and failures that have made him and his clients so successful. Over the years, Bob has brought 77 companies back from the brink and changed them into thriving, profitable businesses. His energy is amazing, and at 74, he proves that you can still have a great deal to give others if you just try. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. One insight struck me was that most companies do not have a plan. The old Chinese proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there, is true today. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. This has been Dan Perkins with your Recalculating.biz featured book.
You are listening to Ann Daw and Don Mazzella, and the program is Food and Wine Insider. If you have a question or know someone you think our listeners should hear, contact us at foodandwineinsider.com. Remember, our programs are heard every Wednesday and Saturday on this station via amfm247.com or on iHeartRadio, as well as Roku Television. You can listen to past shows at foodandwineinsider.com.
Our next guest is Bradley Bennett, who is the principal pickle at Pacific Pickle Works. We invited him here to talk about being given a kosher rating and much more about the pickle business in general. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Bradley. This is Ann. And again, welcome to the Food and Wine Insider Show. I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about you and your history. Before you started in the food business, you were an architect, I believe, and then in the tech industry. Could you talk a little bit about your early career?
Yeah, sure. I attended school at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo to study to be an architect, and after going through a long program there, when I graduated, it was just a tough time in the building industry. So there weren't a lot of jobs for architects, maybe a few draftsmen here and there. And some of the firms were going out of business and whatnot. So I ended up really almost very quickly, only after about a year after being out of school and working as an architect, I ended up in the software industry, which was booming at the time. So this was in the in the mid 90s, and ended up being there at a company that was a great company. It was local here in Santa Barbara for about 12 years. So it just all that just sort of happened by chance. And I was in the customer operations side, but I was also working with a software platform that was around food a lot. We were doing point of sale software and working with a lot of restaurants, casinos, hotels, that kind of thing, that had a lot of exposure to food. And while I was in school, I was friends with a lot of people who were either chefs or were people that just enjoyed food. And so I was always sort of interested in playing around with things. And so it was during my second software job that I was in where I sort of started doing this pickle making project just on the side, and I was doing it for friends and family, and just for like holiday gifts, and making pickled green beans and pickled asparagus, pickled cucumbers, and it was just something that I was curious about. And I had refined this recipe to the point where people were insistent on being on the list for their pickles every year. And after 4 or 5 years of doing that, it became such a big thing that I was like, okay, I either have to stop doing this or turn it into a business or something, because it's too much work to just kind of do as a little hobby. And so we decided to brand it and just tested it out in the shelves in a few places, and locally here, and it went into 3 or 4 stores, and next thing you know, I had calls from 4 more stores, and then 4 more stores, and before we could look back, it was in stores all throughout Santa Barbara County and dipping into LA, and then we got into a few Whole Foods, and then a few more Whole Foods, and it just kind of grew organically. So next thing you knew, we had an actual business on our hands.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was going to say, of all the foodstuffs that you could have been in, you picked pickles. So I try to, I get that I love the story that you started making them as presents and whatnot, but why pickles?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I'm still wondering myself. I actually, I loved olives at the time, and I was curious about olives, and I was like, man, they're so expensive. I'm like, I should just make them. They're probably not too difficult. It would be a fun project. And so I embarked on a project of trying to make olives, and what I found was that it was difficult to get the source fruit for olives, in any kind of quality or quantity. And there was like one really big famous olive company here in Santa Barbara. And so I just drove up to their ranch and talked to the owner, and he's like, here, kid, have 50 pounds of raw olives, have at it. And then the next year they didn't have any available, and it was like, well, this is a really difficult thing to do. And so then I thought, well, what about pickles? Those are kind of vinegary, and I like pickles, And so, um, and turns out making a pickle you can make in a day versus, and I'm talking about quick pickles, like the kind you put in a hot water bath and vinegar and water, sugar, and salt. And I'm like, wow, these are pretty good, and it's really quick and easy. The olives was about a 2-month long process, where you have to cure the olives and you have to rinse out all the lye, and then you have to do the saltwater bath for a number of weeks, and then you go into the marinade in the jar. So it's a very long process, where a pickle is like in a day. So it became a quick and easy thing to do for holiday gifts that people really seem to enjoy, and they look pretty in the jar. So it was sort of my second choice of a thing to make as a holiday gift, but they turned out all right.
It turned out great. How did you come up with the name Pacific Pickle Works?
Well, when I started getting serious about wanting to turn this into a brand, I thought, well, something like Brad's Pickles or something is not got very much marketing cachet. And so I said, if I'm going to pick a brand, I don't want to change that brand, somewhere down the road if we're going to try to make a big deal out of this. So I wanted something that would work as a national brand, or at least regional, and be appealing to a wide variety of places. And we're, right on the Pacific here in Santa Barbara, and so there were a lot of Pacific this and Pacific that. I didn't want to be Santa Barbara Pickle Company because it was sounded too close to Santa Barbara Olive Company, which was already a thing, and I didn't want to be too closely associated or assumed to be associated with that. Santa Barbara has a lot of marketing cachet just in its name, so it was tough not to choose that. So I ended up looking for things that were similar, but it didn't sound like it. And I don't know where the works thing came into it, but it just sounded like a sort of nice, crafty kind of sounding thing. And I started Googling around, and it turns out the trademark was available, but there was actually it was a Pacific Pickle and Vinegar Works that was alive, like way back in like the I think the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they had long since gone out of business. There's an old black and white photo I found on the internet. So that was kind of an interesting find, but the trademark was available, and so I thought, well, this sounds good, and we went forward and did a branding design around that, and it seemed to have been a good sounding, a good resonating brand with people when they see it on the shelf.
Yeah, no, I think it has that. I think it has a very interesting feel to it, because it feels both authentic in terms of sort of the works, but also very modern, because you think of almost tech in some respects. So it's got this great balance of being somewhat modern, but also somewhat honed in sort of traditional ways of making things. So I think it's really fantastic. You are small batch. You're welcome. You are small batch. You're hand packed, and you're all natural. Why are those attributes important to your brand?
Well, something like this, especially when you look at like packing green beans and asparagus, things that are very fragile, even pickles in a jar, they really don't lend themselves to being machine packed. But when they do, like if you find like a pickle brand that's machine packed, they tend to take a lot of shortcuts that reduce the quality in it. I actually met with a guy who was the former CEO of one of the really large pickle brands, and he was describing the equipment. He was telling me they actually have a thing called a wilter, that as the cucumbers go through it, makes it just soft and squishy enough that the machine can jam these things into the jar. And I thought, wow, that's really sad. You have a machine that actually intentionally reduces the quality of this item before it goes in the jar. And then, of course, they jam it with, all kinds of artificial preservatives and things. And these are things that I don't care to eat, and I actually can taste, when there's calcium chloride and all these other types of artificial, chemicals and stuff that make something, preserved for a long period of time. And so I didn't want to have anything to do with that. And quite frankly, when you're starting out small, it's harder to go find those things than it is to just use natural ingredients. And so that's just kind of where we got our start. And as the food movement has sort of really gone since I got started is that these are becoming more and more important values to consumers. So it was the right thing to stay on that path and to tout it and to, to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the field. There are actually a lot of all natural pickled products in our space, but there's also a lot that aren't. So, it kind of separates those who are and those who aren't.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And having a real person behind the product line is also something that distinguishes you. Fermented foods, I don't know if you knew this, have taken over the #1 spot as the top spot for superfoods. They ousted seeds in the last year. That was by Pollock Communications and Today's Dietitian. And it's also linked to improved gut health and overall well-being. Did you know you were going to be at the forefront of a trend?
Well, yeah, the fermented foods category certainly has been growing in popularity, and there's a lot of great things in all kinds of categories beyond pickles, of course, in that space as well. And the vinegars that we use are fermented. We're actually technically not a fermented food as a vinegar pickle, but most of the pickles, and most people don't realize this, are not. The ones that are shelf stable in the middle of the aisle, in the grocery aisle where we are, that are all made with vinegar and water, sugar, and salt, are because of the fact that they go through pasteurization process. When they're in the heat canning process, they would kill off any active bacteria. So it's only a few products that go through that natural fermentation that are in the that are in the cooler case that can actually claim fermented status. But we often get lumped into it, and there's no doubt that there's nothing really unhealthy in the product, and we are using fermented ingredients in the vinegars. But yeah, it's definitely gets a lot of attention, and it wasn't my intent getting into it to be in that space, but it's been an interesting food trend, certainly.
So maybe more of an opportunity for you as you look forward. What were some of the surprises that you found as you started out in this business?
Well, I came from a business background in software, so I didn't come in naively into understanding what it takes to run a business. And I had a lot of the tools at my disposal and experience that really made it easy for me to get started, maybe easier than for a lot of people, meaning that it was easy for me to sit down and create my own website. It's easy for me to create financial spreadsheets. It was easy for me to, talk to vendors and to handle sales and to do things that might be difficult for other people in terms of getting started. But what I wasn't really aware of getting into this business specifically is just how the whole ecosystem of the grocery industry works, which is our primary market, is selling wholesale to grocery stores, and just how the distribution chain works with how you have a manufacturer like me, you have a broker that's selling the product, you have a distributor that's buying it and shipping it to customers. And then obviously you've got the large retailers that are buying it from them. And not only is there a lot of mouths to feed along that chain, that distribution chain, there's also a lot of expectations for performance requirements and for periodic discounting in the wholesalers or in the retail chain, which comes out of your pocket, and sort of the free goods in order to get placement in these stores. It's an expectation, and a lot of that kind of thing, which has been very difficult and frustrating because it really makes it difficult to become profitable in this industry, as opposed to when you have a small business in your store and you're selling direct to your consumers and you're getting all of that margin instead of paying all those people. We also sell online, which is our only opportunity actually to get full retail. We have to do a little labor to pack and ship the boxes, but that's the most profitable side of our business. If it could be larger, it would certainly be helpful to us. But I never expected that that I would be wanting to grow our online component of our business as much as I do now.
No, I think that's really smart to diversify as much as you can, and certainly for retailers, it's all about the turns. And a lot of small businesses, when they start out, they think they ought to be in 12 or 24 packs when they really should be in 6 packs, because the faster you get turns, the more you get the reorders, and the reorders make the retailers happy, and they make the distributors happy, and all of that.
Yep.
As you think about your challenges today, how are you thinking about how you will scale up, since you're producing yourself?
Yeah. I think about that a lot. When I started, as many small food businesses do, I was working out of shared kitchens, because I only needed a day, a week, and then I needed, maybe 2 days a week. And I didn't have the resources to own a kitchen or to go and rent one just for myself. And for the first 4 years of my business, I did that, and I had the good fortune of some very kind, gracious people who let me use that for free or for trade, even, which really helped the cash flow situation. And then there became a point where we needed our own facility, and we built out a facility here in Santa Barbara that is our pickle factory. It's a small, very modest place, but it's nice and it's clean. It's ours, and we can ship and receive all our goods there, and all our jars and the big pallets of things that come in, and ship out pallets of stuff to our distributor. And so it really works well for us. And we designed it to grow into. So we designed it to be bigger than what we needed. So now we sort of rent back to some of those other starting up guys who need, just a day or two here and there. We have capacity and warehouse storage for them. And then as we grow, we'll, grow into that facility as people leave and take over some of that space. So we've got a lot of runway where we are. And even when we exceed that, we really will only be running out of warehouse space, in which case we can get other warehouse space nearby. So we've got a lot of future here. However, if we grow exponentially, and we need to, there's 2 options. You can either find a reliable co-packer that can do it exactly to our spec, or we can, if we are liking making it and we think we're doing well at it, we can grow and expand into a new and larger facility. So we'll have to make that decision somewhere down the road, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, you are unusual, because many specialty producers start out with a co-packer to reduce their exposure and their investment, but you make the product yourself. And I think listeners would be curious to know how you went about raising the capital needed to self-manufacture, because there's so many different avenues for doing that today. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. And I'll tell you before I do that my initial intent when I looked into this was to actually use a co-packer, and there was only one co-packer, was kind of within easy driving range from here, like within 100 miles, I'll say. And I went and checked that out, and the relationship didn't work out, and I didn't feel that they were going to meet the quality that I wanted. So I said, well, let's go our own, which turned out to be quite a project, because we had to very quickly get licensed with the state of California to be a licensed cannery, and go through a lot of kind of legal stuff to get certified in a shared kitchen that someone else owned, which fortunately they were amenable to doing. And so the way we got here, and like I said, was first going through those shared kitchens. So we didn't have to have that capital initially. And so we were able to sort of grow bit by bit. And so that by the time we were ready for our own facility, we already had a little bit of runway. I also went out and did a Kickstarter project and to do some crowdfunding, and raised a little bit of capital there. But it ended up being another year before we built our facility. So the money that we raised from that, which, wasn't enough to build a facility out, had already been well absorbed into just our operations, day to day, and just funding what we were doing. So when it came time to do it, I reached deep into my own pockets, and I borrowed some money from some friends and family, and we set about cost effectively as possible building this facility. I had the benefit of having an architecture degree and being able to handle most of all the drawings and dealing with the city and getting the permits all on my own, and was able to probably save, you know, $75 to $100,000 in the process just by handling, not having to pay architects, not having to pay someone to handle getting the permits, not having to, and really I was able to manage a large percentage of the general contracting as well. So I was able to save on sort of overseeing the building out of the facility, and did it, you know, and I went out and went to the auctions and found, you know, the large kitchen equipment at auction, and was able to get a lot of that stuff for, you know, a fraction of the price that you would pay for it new, and just got as resourceful and as scrappy as I could, so that by the time we were done, you know, the build out for our facility was much more reasonable than what you might expect, or that someone that didn't have the wherewithal to do all that stuff might have to pay if they just went out and said, hey, build me a kitchen.
No, thank you for sharing that, because I think there's always different ways of how people approach it, and you know, friends and family and angel investing and crowdsourcing, those all help, but it's unique that you had this skill as well to be able to build something out and know what the aspects were that you needed to do it properly, but also do it at a reasonable cost. So good for you.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about your product line. You've got several different vegetables that you pickle. You have green beans and carrots and asparagus and even Brussels sprouts. And I think you won a Sophie Award for the Brussels sprouts. That's from the Specialty Food Association. You also have cocktail mixes. I'm curious to know, what your challenges are in, and I don't know if you're actually selling to different buyers or not, but are you selling, do you have to approach different buyers for these different segments of your product line, or do you sell them into the same channel, into the same buyer?
Yeah, it depends on the scale of the organization. So yeah, if we're talking grocery, a lot of times the cocktail mixes will be a different buyer than the pickles and pickled items. The pickles, regular pickles and the pickled veggies always are going, you know, into the same buyers, and are always in the same general area of the shelf. The cocktail mixes, it just depends. Sometimes by luck it is the same buyer. For example, Whole Foods sees that as a different category, but in our case, it's the same buyer who happens to represent both of those categories. So we're dealing with the same person, but on a different schedule. And then smaller groceries, you know, it's one person handles it all. So you might find yourself in a lot of the smaller 1 to 5 unit store, grocery store, specialty grocery stores, that it's going to be the same person, and they'll look at the whole line and go, wow, this is really unique. Let's do all this stuff. And some places want to market it all together, and some people want to slot, you know, the green beans with all the other green beans. I'd prefer to see our whole line put together. And if you look at the whole line, when it's lined up, it looks really great and has a lot of shelf impact, just because of the way the logo and all the different colored bands around each of the different pickled items work together when they're in a row. And then the cocktail mixes being nearby is handy, because you kind of, you know, the whole reason, and just for your listeners to understand, when we say cocktail mixes, we're talking about savory drink mixers. So we're talking about Bloody Mary mixes and michelada mixes, and we bottle our pickle brine as well, which is used for doing pickleback shots and pickletinis, which is a growing trend. The picklebacks are, that is, and as are micheladas. But the Bloody Marys, you know, are so commonly garnished with products like ours. We actually started doing things like green beans and asparagus and carrots sort of as Bloody Mary garnishes. And as we were doing demos and events, we would oftentimes make little mini Bloody Marys or the like to sample them with, to hand someone like a little mini Bloody with all these garnishes in it, to sort of give them that idea. And the Bloody Mary mix that I was making at home to do this with, people were like, wow, this is really great. Like, you guys should sell this stuff. And I was like, you know, and I started thinking about it. I was like, oh, this could be kind of fun. But we took a different spin on it. And instead of making the Bloody Mary mix with tomato juice and everything, we just made a bottle of seasoning, which is all the brown and spicy goodness that you would put into tomato juice, and you supply your own tomato juice. So the Bloody Mary elixir, we house make our own Worcestershire sauce, which I don't know anybody else that does. And then we add in horseradish, lime, and other spices to that little bottle. And that little tiny bottle there will make a half-gallon of mix when you mix it with tomato juice. And so that was sort of the spin that we decided to take on marketing that product. And so, kind of getting back to your question, then, it just really kind of depends on the location and the type of store as to who's going to be buying that product.
Bradley, I've been told I only have one more question I can ask you, and I have so many more questions, so I'm trying to pick one.
Sorry that I'm so long-winded.
No, it's perfect. I love the way you've told the stories. You've given so much texture and depth to the answers, so I love it. What role does, I guess one of the important questions, especially for other entrepreneurs, is what role trade shows play for you? And have you attended those as exhibitors? Have you also attended as an attendee just to learn what's out there? What's your sort of approach to trade shows? I think would be a great question. And if I could sneak in another one, is if you had the opportunity to do something over again, what would it be? I know that's two questions, but we're going to try and do it.
That's all right. I'm with you. From the trade show standpoint, there's one key trade show that everybody in my space is in, that we all have to be at, and that's the Fancy Food Show. And there's one winter and one in summer, and the winter one is in San Francisco. So when I started to realize that to really get bigger clients and to make key connections and relationships that I needed to grow the business, that I was going to have to go to this show, the first step was to go as an attendee and said, well, let's go check it out and just see what this thing's all about, because I have no idea. I've never been to this thing. I've been to lots of large trade shows and software, so I get the trade show game and I get standing on a trade show floor for hours on end, but I'd never gone to a food trade show. And so we walk the floor, and of course it's exciting and disheartening at the same time, because you walk around and you see just how many people are fighting to be on the grocery shelves, and you're like, there's not room for all these people. So how is this going to work out? And you see people standing in booths that don't have a lot of people in their booth, and you think that's depressing. That could be me. Or you see people that are killing it, and they've got really great brands, a lot of excitement, and it can kind of get you excited. So, but it's definitely a reality check, and you realize how the scope of that is. Our first couple years going to trade shows, we participated in a group called Savor California, and they buy a large booth space at Fancy Food Show, and then we can buy a small table within their group. So it makes it a little bit more affordable getting into it. There's a lot less that you have to do to, prepare to be there. So it costs less and it's less work, and you're among other small startups. You can all kind of talk and learn from each other. So it was a great way to kind of get into the trade show thing. There are other trade shows like Expo West and Expo East that are big in this space that we have only attended and not exhibited at. That would be the other kind of big one. My view on trade shows is there are certain ones you just have to be there to be relevant, but you could waste a lot of money going to all of them. So you have to kind of pick and choose which ones make the most sense for you. And if you're getting business and it's working out, then keep going. And if it's not, don't waste the money. Our first year going to the Fancy Food Show was the year that we patched together our Whole Foods deals for North and Southern California, as well as identifying a distributor. So that was an important step for us, and we couldn't have done that and appeared relevant without having been there. So that made sense for us at the time. And if I had to do anything over again, that's a really tough one. There's probably a lot of things I might do over again, but I think you have to be careful about sort of defining your line and picking your SKUs. We have a pretty extensive line, and we're sort of locked in with some of those SKUs. Maybe not. Maybe I just kind of feel that way, but maybe it might have been made more sense to be more focused rather than spread out across so many things. But we enjoy making all those things, so we continue to do it for the meantime.
We've been talking with Bradley Bennett of Pacific Pickle Works. Bradley, one last thing, your website where people can reach you.
Yeah, we are at pacificpickleworks.com. So come see us and order lots of stuff online.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
You've been listening to Food and Wine Insider with Ann Daw and Don Mazzella. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.